Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Divorced Woman's Guide podcast. How are you all doing today? I hope that wherever you are, that you are enjoying the moment, that you are staying present, and that you are just flourishing today. That is my wish for all of you tuning in. And today's episode, I wanted to chat with you guys a little bit about communication. And this can be communication with your former partner, your ex. It could be with family, it could be with siblings, friends, kids, anybody in your life. So, really, this episode really helps you to figure out who it is that you are today and how it is that you get to shift your communication with the people in your life. And I'm sure many of you agree with this statement, which is that really the key to success in any relationship that we have in our life is about good communication. And yet at the same time, so many of us were not taught the fine art of truly listening to another person. And when I say listening to understand. And at the core of cooperation, I believe the core of cooperation actually lies in our ability to communicate effectively, and that the foundation for good communication with anybody in our life lies in our ability to understand. And there's a quote that I came across, which I love and I reference all the time, and it's by Dr. Stephen R. Covey. And he says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And when we are listening to and trying to understand our co-parent, specifically for those of us going through divorce or after divorce, listening to and trying to understand our co-parent is far more powerful than you might realize. And that's because listening is an actual skill. It is a skill that does not come easily to us when we feel unheard, when we feel unseen, when we feel wronged, angry, bitter, resentful, etc. Insert whatever negative emotion right there that you so choose. And one of the main reasons why I believe it's so difficult for us to listen and to truly hear what somebody else is telling us is because we are rooted in fear. What comes up for you hearing me say that? Fear. It's fear of not being heard, fear of not being accepted, fear of being disrespected, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of confrontation, fear of being misunderstood. Insert whatever that fear is. And what ends up happening is that fear is what prevents us from consciously listening. And our capacity to listen without any objective is in part limited by our fears, our beliefs, which aren't real, just like fear, our expectations, which are also not real. They're not rooted in fact. Judgments are also not rooted in fact. And without fear, imagine if you had no fear. You wouldn't have judgment. You wouldn't have expectations. You wouldn't have beliefs. You wouldn't have fears of anything. There would just be what is. And then guess what? We would have the capacity to listen to other people, to observe, to take in exactly just that, to take in what is, because we wouldn't feel threatened by it. And when we feel threatened, we go into fear projections, storytelling. So that means that we're no longer listening. And instead, we're actively projecting our own version of reality onto the other person. I used to do this all the time. I would have conversations in my head that were all fear-based because I didn't communicate. And I would have these conversations in my mind thinking that my ex-husband knew what I was saying, because then all of a sudden, when I found the time to communicate, I had already told the story and he just got the ending. He wasn't even a part of it. And it's through the lens of the fear, the beliefs, the expectations, the judgments that we create a version of reality that doesn't exist, but we bring it into existence when we project it. And we project it through our words, through our body language, through our actions. And then guess what happens? We're no longer in rapport with them, and we start feeling the effects of separation, of miscommunication, of conflict, AKA more fear, more beliefs, more projections, judgments, expectations. And sometimes it's obvious that we're in that place because full-blown fights break out. And other times it can be more subtle. And those are the times where you sense that there's tension, you feel disconnected, you feel uncomfortable. And it's in those moments that you've stopped listening consciously. And instead, you are stuck in what I said before, which is your version of reality, which is really projection mode, projection of fear, projection of beliefs, expectations, and judgments. And then what you've done is you've essentially created a wedge between you and whoever it is that you are trying to communicate with. And when that happens, we lose the capacity to separate our fears, beliefs, expectations, and judgments of whoever it is that we're trying to communicate with from what they're actually saying. How can we then truly understand what they're trying to communicate if we're projecting? Guess what? You can't. So if that's the case, what kind of results do you think you're going to get from those types of communication experiences? I know one thing for sure, and that's fear-based communication only leads to fear-driven results. It's that simple. Honestly, it's that simple. How many of you listening are saying to yourself, man, I just want to change that. That is so what I do. Help me, Wendy. How do I change this? I'd ask you this next question. Are you truly ready to start listening to others outside of the lens of your fears, of your beliefs, of your expectations, of your judgments? Yes or no? And another question, would you like to stop listening to reply and start listening to understand? Do you want to stop listening to react and listen to understand? Because I'm about to drop a truth bomb on you guys right now, and that's that how most people listen isn't really listening, you guys. But unfortunately, listening to reply or react is the standard way that most of the world communicates. And to be honest, it's why I believe so many of us are such poor communicators. And so what that means is that instead of really paying attention to what the other person is saying, you're already thinking about what you want to say in response. Think about it. Think about another conversation that you had where you're literally waiting for like the breath of air to come where you can just pounce. Now, listen, it's wonderful. It's amazing when you have a reply that's well thought out. But if you're thinking about what you want to say, instead of actually hearing what the other person is saying, you aren't really listening or communicating that well. Be honest. How many of you are doing this? Now, you may be getting your point across, or perhaps not, because the chances of the other person listening the same way that you do is really high. So ultimately, you're not having a meaningful interaction with that other person. It's just not possible to react and listen at the same time. It's just not. And when we get triggered and start reacting from the lens of fear, we go into that endless cycle of projections that I was talking about earlier. And when you're projecting, you're no longer listening. You're listening, but you're listening to your own fears. You're not listening to what's actually being said. And when we react to our pain and to the projections that we make of more pain to come in the future, we get entranced in projection mode and into the future. And if we're caught up in the future, you're not listening. What you're doing is you're too caught up in and you're too busy micromanaging and controlling all the ways in which things could go wrong. And if you were able to, in that moment of triggering, to stop projecting your fears onto the situation, you would get back into listening to understand. And when we listen outside the lens of fear, we have the capacity to focus completely on what the other person is saying without reacting to our own projections of the implications of their words, their body language, and their actions. Now, I want to say something that I didn't understand, that I wish somebody said to me a long time ago. And I'm going to say it to you right now. And I'm going to say it twice because I believe it is that important for you to hear me. Listening does not mean agreeing with what the other person is saying. And I'm going to say that again. Listening does not mean that you are agreeing with what the other person is saying. Listening means going, I hear you. It doesn't mean I agree with you. That's not what you're saying. And that is why I believe listening is so crucial in every relationship, but most importantly, with your kids and with your co-parent, with your kid's parent. And I believe that there are 5 benefits associated with consciously listening. Number 1, it builds trust and respect. It shows the other person that you're actually interested in what it is that they're saying. It doesn't mean you agree. It means that you are open to perspective because theirs is going to be different than yours. And people are more likely to come to you when they feel that they can trust you, that you hold space, you hold a trusted space for them to communicate. It's really important. This happened to me just yesterday with my kid's dad, where all of a sudden our relationship has shifted a lot over the last, I would say, year and a half. And he came to me yesterday confiding in me and asking me for support. I literally thought pigs were flying. And then I remembered that I show up differently. And I've been building trust and respect with him as he has been doing with me. And I was so grateful in that moment that we had come to that place because I now know that listening to understand works. Even when in the past it's been one-sided, it shifts them. Another benefit is I believe that either nonverbal or verbal skills allows the other person to know that you're truly listening and engaged. If you just stay silent, they don't know that you're listening. That's why I said before, listening and affirming that you are is saying, okay, I hear you, keep going. Interesting. You appear interested, and that allows the other person to be more honest and forthcoming. And they're more likely to talk openly if they feel heard. You don't have to agree with them. And most of my communication with my kid's dad happens on the phone or via email. And a lot of times I ask questions to get curious to make sure that I'm hearing him correctly. And so that leads me into number 3, which is that when we're practicing conscious listening skills with people in our life, we're actually building up to having a strong relationship. And our ability to actually engage with the other person in solving a problem, to being a solution rather than contributing to the problem. And by listening, you're actually giving yourself the ability to see their perspective. You don't have to agree with it, but there's so many different perspectives that people have on a certain situation. And perhaps it's one you haven't considered. And I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying you're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. And I'm not saying you're wrong. All I'm saying is it gives you information. Number 4 is when you are consciously listening, you're actually reducing your chance of miscommunication. And you guys, this also reduces the chance of the other person coming into the conversation with the same type of communication skills that you do. And I get this all the time. People will say to me, oh, they're never going to change. Well, okay, you have the choice to. And even if I believe wholeheartedly, and this is the energy healer in me, that even if it's one-sided, you're going to notice less conflict. You guys, I'm telling you, give it a try, because the way that you've been doing it, I imagine isn't working for all of you. Just try. Because number 5 benefit of consciously listening is that it does help to eliminate conflict and anger and fear and resentment, bitterness. Because when we don't communicate with others, what we do instead is we make assumptions. We make assumptions about what the other person is thinking and feeling. And what does that do? It leads to miscommunication. It leads to fights, anger, resentment. And when you choose to consciously listen, you're listening to learn. Learning is understanding versus assuming what you think they're thinking or feeling. And becoming a conscious listener takes practice. It doesn't happen overnight. I use this skill with my clients all the time. They are in constant practice in all these skills that you get to learn and relearn based on who it is that you are today. And this is a big reason why I'm kicking off my May co-parenting workshop with this as our week 1 topic, which is how it is that we get to show up as better communicators. It starts with you. And from there, when you know and can identify who it is that you are after marriage, as mom, as insert your name, you'll be able to better improve your communication skills with people in your life. This includes your kids, family, colleagues, everybody. And when you practice how to communicate better, you'll be able to start enforcing boundaries, which is going to be week 2. Learning how to create them. The ones you have in your life that are not firm yet flexible. And then from there, how is it that we use all of this to foster a relationship with our kids, to show up as a better co-parent for our children so that they feel that they are in the center instead of in the middle of a tug of war? Because at the end of the day, when you two are fighting, the kids think that you're fighting with them. They are an extension of you and their other parent. And then the last week, I'm going to spend some time talking about how, when new relationships, step parents come into the picture, how that integration gets to happen. And I have a lot of experience on that because my kids have had a stepmom for almost 1.5 years. Their stepmom has been in their life for almost 3 years. And navigating that relationship was a challenge for me. It was a challenge for my boys. And I've got a lot to say about it. I've got a lot to teach about it. I have a lot of opinions about it. So I would love to see those of you listening, sign up for this workshop. This episode will drop next week, which is May 5th. And that is actually day 1 of the workshop. And it's not too late to sign up. There's replays and there's workbooks as well. There is so much to be gained by being a part of this workshop. And there's also a private Facebook group that I am creating that you get to be a part of. So I hope to see you guys there. And I also hope that what you learned today around communication and how the key to communication is really around listening to understand instead of to react resonates with all of you today. As always, I love hearing your feedback. So please don't be shy. Please share with me. I would love to hear what it is that came up for you, what you learned. And if you are interested in learning more about the co-parenting workshop, check out the link in the show notes. And you can also find the link in the email that this podcast episode will be coming out in. Sending you all, as always, tons of love, light, and joy. Mwah. Bye, everybody.